The dashboard lights died first, then the engine, then the hum
Please,
of
just
the
give me
air
one bar.
conditioning that Adrian Voss had stopped. Noticing years ago the way you stopped, noticing your own heartbeat, and by the time his $280,000 Satan rolled silently onto the shoulder of Route 9, 11 miles from the nearest exit, at 11 minutes past midnight, he had already gone through every name in his phone that was supposed to make problems like this disappear. None of them answered. Not because they wouldn't have, because there was no signal at all out here. On a stretch of 2-lane blacktop between a wheat field and a tree line, the kind of road that existed in the space between places that mattered. Adrian sat in the dark for 4 minutes before he understood, with a specific kind of disbelief reserved for men who have not needed to understand it before, that no one was coming unless he made them. He would remember later that the last text he ever sent his father had gone unanswered for the same reason, not because his father wouldn't have replied, but because by the time Adrian sent it, his father could no longer hold a phone. Before we find out what happened when the tow truck finally arrived, and why the driver would say something that stopped Adrian Voss cold on the side of a dark highway, we need a minute to understand what he was carrying that night, and why it mattered more than the car. Adrian was 39 years old, and he ran a private equity firm that managed just under $4 billion in assets, a fact that had never once in 14 years stopped mattering to him the way most things stopped mattering once you'd achieved them. 6 months earlier, his father, Daniel Voss, had died in a hospice room 2 states away while Adrian was in a boardroom closing a deal that, by the time he landed at the hospital, had already become irrelevant in every way that counted. He had made it in time to hold his father's hand for 11 minutes before the machines went quiet. He had not made it in time to ask him the things he'd been meaning to ask for over a decade, about the 20 years before the money, the small auto parts company his father had built out of a 2-bay garage before it became the conglomerate Adrian had inherited and multiplied. Daniel Voss had never talked about those years. When Adrian asked, his father would say only, "That part of the story doesn't matter anymore," and change the subject. And Adrian, busy building his own version of success, had let him. He had been driving home from a due diligence trip to a manufacturing plant 2 hours out. Alone, no driver, because it was late and he'd wanted the silence, when the sedan's electrical system simply stopped believing in itself and coasted to a stop on the shoulder of Route 9, the first tow service he reached after finally getting 1 bar of signal by standing on the trunk of his own car, quoted him 90 minutes and told him, apologetically, that anyone closer was a local independent operator they couldn't guarantee availability for. Adrian, cold, tired, and further from his usual footing than he'd been in years, told them to send whoever was closest. The truck that pulled up 35 minutes later was a 1998 Ford flatbed, with rust blooming along the wheel, Wells and Whitaker and Sons Towing painted on the door in letters that had been touched up by hand more than once. The man who climbed out of it was 68 years old, broad through the shoulders in a way that decades of physical work leave on a person, wearing a faded green work jacket over a flannel shirt, a ball cap pushed back on gray hair, and the unhurried economy of movement that comes from having done this exact job at this exact hour more times than he could count. "Evening," the man said. "Earl Whitaker. Let's see what we got." Adrian stood by while Earl worked the winch with the practiced hands of someone who didn't need to think about what his hands were doing anymore. Hooking the sedan's frame, checking the angle twice, moving without wasted motion in the cone of his truck's work lights. Adrian, watching, felt the specific irritation of a man used to being the most capable person in any room, reduced for the moment to someone who could not fix his own car and had no one left to call who could. "You want your registration and insurance for the paperwork," Earl said, holding out a clipboard. "Standard for the tow company?" Adrian handed over his wallet card without really looking at him. Earl glanced at it under the truck's work light, and something in his posture changed, not dramatically, just a stillness that hadn't been there a second before. "Voss," Earl said slowly. "Any relation to Daniel Voss? Used to run a garage out on Miller Road, must be, Lord, 40 years back now." Adrian looked up properly for the first time. "That was my father." Earl was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man recalculating something. "Was," he repeated. "I'm sorry to hear that. When?" 6 months ago." Earl took his cap off, held it for a second, put it back on. "I didn't know that." "I'm sorry, son. Truly." He looked back at the winch, at the sedan rising slowly onto the flatbed. "I knew your daddy. Long time ago. Before any of—" he gestured vaguely at the car, at everything the car represented. "Before all this. Before we continue, if you believe that grief has no schedule, and that the people we've lost are sometimes better known by strangers than by us, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Dailies, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today." Adrian didn't know what to do with the sentence. He had spent 6 months being told by employees and board members and the occasional obituary writer about the Daniel Voss who built a conglomerate, the visionary, the risk-taker, the man whose name was on 3 buildings. He had never once in 6 months met anyone who spoke about the man from before, because as far as Adrian understood it, there had barely been a before. His father had built the empire from a modest inheritance and a good instinct for manufacturing contracts. That was the story. That had always been the story. "You worked for him?" Adrian asked. "Worked with him," Earl said. "There's a difference, though I don't expect it matters much to say so now." He finished securing the sedan, checked the chains a final time, and straightened up, wincing slightly at his lower back, the way a body does after 68 years of exactly this kind of labor. "Come on, I'll run you into town. Truck's warm, at least." They drove in silence for the first few miles, Earl's old flatbed rattling gently over a road lit only by the truck's own headlights. The wheat field, giving way to scattered houses, a gas station, the first signs of a town that hadn't quite woken up yet. Adrian sat with his father's name still hanging in the cab between them, unwilling, for reasons he couldn't fully name, to let the silence close over it. "What do you mean, before all this?" Adrian finally said. "Before what?" Earl was quiet for a long moment, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the dark road. "Your daddy and I opened Miller Road Auto together, 1979. 2 bays, 1 lift, a coffee can for the till. I put in what savings I had, he put in the rest. And we ran that place together for 6 years before the business took a turn neither one of us saw coming. A contract with a parts distributor that your daddy chased down himself. Working nights, driving 2 states over on his own dime to make the pitch. That contract's what became everything after. The company you probably grew up thinking he built alone. He'd never mentioned a partner. No reason he would have. I suppose. Earl's voice held no bitterness in it, which struck Adrian more than bitterness would have. When the contract came through, the business needed more capital than either of us had, and I had a boy, my son, Michael, who needed a heart surgery that summer. The kind of surgery that doesn't wait for business plans to mature. Your daddy bought out my half of Miller Road Auto for more than it was worth. A lot more. I never asked him to. He just did it, put the check in my hand and told me to go take care of my boy and not think twice about the business. I never forgot that. I think about it every time I hear the Voss name on a building downtown. Adrian sat with that in the dark cab, feeling something shift loose in his chest that he did not have a name for yet. Is your son? He's 51 now. Good health, good family, 2 kids of his own. Earl allowed himself a small, private smile at that. Your daddy's check bought that. I started this tow business with what was left, and here I still aim. Not the empire he built, but it's mine, and it's honest, and I've never once resented the difference. Adrian looked out the window at the dark shapes of the town passing by. He never told me any of this. Man built a life out of moving forward, Earl said. I expect looking back wasn't a place he liked to stand for long. They pulled into the only auto shop in town still lit at that hour. An old friend of Earl's who kept late hours for exactly these situations. Earl backed the flatbed in with the same unhurried competence he'd shown on the highway, and as he lowered the sedan onto the ground, Adrian found himself standing in the cold with the question he hadn't planned on asking. Why didn't you ever tell anyone this? The company puts his name on buildings. Nobody knows yours was ever part of it. Earl shrugged, an easy, unweighted gesture. Wasn't my story to sell. It was just what happened. Your daddy did right by me when it counted, and I've lived a good life because of it. Didn't need my name on anything to know that was true. Adrian stood there a long moment, looking at this stranger who had just handed him more of his father than 6 months of grief and 100 sympathy cards ever had. I want to do something, Adrian said. Not to repay you. I don't think that's possible, or the point. But something? Earl studied him for a moment, the same careful, unhurried attention he'd given the winch cable. I don't need anything, son. I've got my truck, my health, my boy, my grandkids. I'm not looking to be fixed. Then let me ask you something else, Adrian said. You said grandkids. Any of them interested in this kind of work? Mechanics, engineering? Earl's face changed slightly at that. My grandson, Tyler, 19, sharp with engines, sharper than I ever was at his age. No money for trade school, though. Working 2 jobs trying to save toward it. 2 weeks later, Tyler Whitaker received a full scholarship to a diesel and automotive technology program 2 hours from home, funded quietly through a foundation grant that never carried the Voss name on the paperwork. The way Adrian's father had once handed over a check without needing his name on it either. Earl found out only when Tyler called him, breathless, unable to explain how it had happened. Earl had a fairly good guess. He never called to say thank you. He understood, the way he'd understood everything else that night, that some debts are best repaid the way they were given, quietly, and without asking for gratitude in return. Adrian visited Miller Road the following month. The original garage was gone, replaced decades ago by a strip of storefronts. But he stood on the corner for a long while anyway, in the cold, thinking about a version of his father he had never been given the chance to know, and was grateful, in the end, that a stranger on a dark highway had known him well enough to hand a piece of him back. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, is there someone who might remember a piece of your family's story that you've never heard?